episode 13 of the podcast series. Today I have with me Dr. Rachel Taniey. She is my nutrition professor at Delphi University. So today I'm here to get the blueprint for how to eat.
Thank you so much for inviting me today.
Yeah, of course. It's a pleasure. Not only do you have a master's degree in nutrition and exercise science, but Professor Taniey also has a PhD in community nutrition, right?
In public health and community health.
Public health.
Yes.
Wow, that's awesome. So I want to ask you, so what was your background? Like, how did you get into this?
Okay, so first of all, I've been a dietitian now for 20 years, which I can't believe it's been 20 years. And I started by going to the University of Massachusetts in 2000, and I actually started as a psychology major.
Really?
And at the end of the first year, I realized that I really, really liked my courses a lot, but I couldn't see myself in any psychology-related careers. So I started to think about, I had actually taken an intro nutrition course, and I was like, oh, I really like this course.
Yeah.
So that kind of started off my interest in nutrition and dietetics.
Wow.
And then from there, I went on to get my dietetic internship from Long Island University, my master's at Queens College, and then my doctorate at CUNY School of Public Health.
So you didn't really know right away, it's more of like kind of, it built up over time.
Yeah, exactly. In high school, I thought I wanted to definitely pursue a degree in psychology. I was really interested in child psychology and abnormal psychology, but then it just didn't click for me career-wise.
Yeah.
But ever since I switched to dietetics, it really did click for me.
Gotcha. Very cool. So for the first time ever podcasting, I have questions with me. Because, I don't know, I just wanted to make sure I hit every point. Usually I kind of like to freestyle, but I just wanted to keep us on like a little a path.
Okay.
So, first question, foods to avoid, right? Any foods in particular that maybe most people might think are healthy, but really aren't?
Okay, so I do want to just start this conversation by saying that I really do believe that all foods have a place. And so when I think about foods to avoid, the three things I'm going to say to avoid are foods that are expired or spoiled, foods that you're allergic to, and foods that you don't like, right? Those are the three main foods that we want to avoid, because really there's a place for every food in our diet, and we don't want to demonize any foods. Then when we really start to think about it, right, and some of the things that we talked about in class, some of the things that we want to avoid are the things that we know: fast food, ultra-processed foods, soda, things that are going to have a lot of added sugar and not really a lot of nutritional value.
Gotcha.
So fast food is one of those because of the low quality meat and things like that.
Gotcha. So you really don't avoid anything.
Yeah, I think everything has a place, even fast food. Once in a while, if you're craving McDonald's, that's okay to have that, right? And we don't want to have that fear mongering in our head, oh, I can't eat certain things. And because a lot of times when we do that, what happens? We end up binge eating on it, right? Or kind of feeling out of control around that food. But if we take away that feeling, then we may be able to enjoy it in smaller quantities.
So essentially, it's like if you restrict yourself too much, you could, I guess, develop an unhealthy relationship with food.
Definitely. So if you were something that I try not to have too much in my house is soda, right?
Yeah.
Soda has a high fructose corn syrup, and we know that it's linked to childhood obesity. But if I'm at a party once in a while, I may want to have a glass of soda, and that way I feel like I can control when I have it. But if I never allow myself to have it, right, and then you could spiral out of control. Or you taste it and it's so sweet that you can't control yourself and you continue to have more and more.
Gotcha.
So moderation. I think is the most important thing.
Moderation would be the word of the day.
Yes.
Okay. And then, so I want to give you a hypothetical situation, right?
Okay.
I put you on an island.
Okay.
And I only give you 10 foods to eat.
Okay.
What are going to be your top 10?
Oh, 10. Okay, that's a good amount.
Yeah.
Definitely, I would want things that have high protein. So things like seafood. So maybe salmon would be one of those. Maybe shrimp would be my second one.
No, actually, I'm happy you brought up salmon, right? So like farm raised versus local. right? Like, does it matter? Is it overrated, that whole thing?
I think that there are pros and cons to both farm-raised salmon and wild caught. And I think...
Hi, I'm sorry
How you
to
doing?
interrupt. Sorry.
It's all good.
Is she here? I can't pronounce her name. Devanshi?
I'm not sure.
Oh,
I think we're
okay.
just using this space.
Oh, okay, no problem.
Sorry about that.
Sorry to interrupt.
It's
Thank
all
you.
good. Nothing like a good interruption. You know, I feel like there's always like at least one interruption. You know, that's why when it happens, you just have to embrace it.
Exactly.
You know. So back to what we talked about,
Okay.
like versus the farm raised versus local.
I think it really has to do with also access and cost and what people have access to. And I don't want people to feel like, oh, I need to have, wild caught salmon or I can't eat fish, right? Because that kind of limits ourselves. I think we should try to, strive to purchasing whatever we can access.
Yeah.
So, that being said, I think both are, valuable resources.
Yeah. So the farm raised isn't necessarily like bad per se. It's just not as good.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's certain conditions that we are concerned about with farm-raised salmon, and if you ever watch any of those documentaries, you kind of see what it looks like to have them in the ocean like that, and so there might be a lot of feces and things like that, so we want to make sure that there's sanitary practices, but other than that, I really think the bottom line is being able to eat whatever you have access to. So if you have access to salmon, you want to make sure that you are able to eat that because you'll get the really good fat and protein from that.
Gotcha.
So I buy, I try to buy what's on sale from Trader Joe's, think about it like that.
So you go your first pick, you go in salmon.
Salmon, definitely. Salmon would be my first pick. I think shrimp might be my second.
Okay.
I think I would also want to make sure I have a lot of good fiber, so fruits. I really like oranges and grapes. So that's at my 4 now.
That's 4, yeah.
Okay. I also think it's really important to have good starchy vegetables, so I would definitely want potatoes.
Okay.
Potatoes and carrots, right? So that's up to 6.
Now, when you say potatoes, are we talking white potatoes, sweet potatoes?
So honestly, I think white potatoes get a lot of flack because people think about them as like refined carbohydrates. But when you really compare the nutritional value of a sweet potato and a white potato, they're actually not that different. There is going to be slightly more fiber in the sweet potato and slightly more minerals.
Is that why people say that sweet potatoes are healthier?
Yeah, I think also just like any like white grains get kind of like white carbohydrates, because potato is not a grain, but white carbohydrates get kind of demonized because we think about them as being more refined and turning into sugar more quickly in our bodies. But really, it doesn't have that much of a difference.
I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? I mean, depending on what you're doing, right? Like if I'm training, right? Like right before I work out, like you want that.
Exactly.
So it really, I guess, depends on the circumstances.
Exactly, and there's definitely times when we want refined carbohydrates, and one of those times is especially right before we work out.
Gotcha. So what do we have? I think that's 4, right?
Okay, I think we were at 6,
salmon,
right?
shrimp,
Grapes and oranges, and then carrots and potatoes.
Okay, so 6.
Okay, avocados.
Avocados. People say that avocados are superfoods. Is that really? I mean, do you think they get a little too much hype?
I think the word superfood has been kind of like being like looked at a little bit now, because what actually constitutes as a superfood? So when I think about a superfood, I think about foods that are really high in antioxidants, right, to help to protect our cells, and foods that are high in nutrients. So to me, avocado is definitely a great superfood because first of all, it's satisfying. It'll fill you up because it has a lot of good fat, and it also has a lot of good vitamins and minerals as well. And it tastes really good, and it's good to add on to our foods.
Yeah.
So are we at 7?
7 will be that's avocado.
Okay. Definitely some kind of cheese, because I love cheese.
Gotcha.
So that's 8. And then eggs.
Eggs. Yeah.
Eggs are a really great source of protein, and they're really good to cook with. I've been on a thing recently where I've been eating 2 hard-boiled eggs every day for breakfast. With some fruit and some grains. So I really am into eggs right now. And one more? hard one. Well, I guess I need some kind of treat in there.
Yeah, why not?
You know, like maybe rainbow cookies is one of
There
my
you go.
favorite desserts.
Yeah.
Or a really good donut
Yeah.
from a good bakery. I think that I would definitely want at least one nice good treat food.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so a variety of foods,
Yeah.
making sure we have our protein, our fiber, and all of our nutrients.
I think with the 10 foods, like the word that comes to my mind is balance. Like it seems like you didn't lean on like one particular category of food. You know, a nice mix of everything.
Definitely. And I think that's really like the goal with nutrition. And you said our word of the day is moderation. Right? So it's all about
A
moderation.
little bit of everything.
Definitely.
Okay. So this is something like I've always wondered, right? So some people say like, oh, you gotta intermittent fast, right? Like that's the way to go. And then other people, especially like bodybuilders, you know, they always advocate for eat every 2 to 3 hours, keep your metabolism going. Like what's the...
So I think it really depends on like what your goal is. And I think a lot of people use intermittent fasting for weight loss.
Yeah.
And because it can work for weight loss, but mostly it works because you are restricting calories, right? So if you're doing intermittent fasting and you're not eating from 8 p.m. the day before until 12 p.m. the next day, then you only have a short period of time to eat, so we naturally will probably eat less. So it's kind of a natural way to decrease our calories. So in that way, it could work. But it doesn't necessarily work any better than any other calorie restriction diet. So are we kind of forcing ourselves to be uncomfortable and hungry when we don't need to be? So that's where like, I'm not so sure intermittent fasting is the best for most people.
So there's really no health benefit to it. It's just a matter of you're more likely to be able to restrict your calories better. But there's no like scientific thing where it's like, oh, it'll...
So that's the main way that it works.
Yeah.
There's another theory that by doing that, you're also doing metabolic switching. So you're also actually switching from burning carbohydrates to burning fat, similar to like a ketogenic diet.
Yeah.
So that is one scientific way that could work, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's more beneficial for weight loss. Plus, in my mind, I think it's better to eat and feel satisfied than to be hungry and waiting till, oh, I can't eat till 12, I can't eat till 12. And I find it a lot harder to focus on work, school, and things like that.
Gotcha. But now, eating every 2 to 3 hours, will that increase your metabolism?
Yeah, so one of the things that I was going to talk to you about metabolism, because I saw that was
that actually was a question.
Yes.
I mean, might as well get into it.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, one of the things I was going to say about metabolism is that when we eat, we're telling our brain that we need those calories for energy. So when we eat on a regular, consistent basis, then our brain knows, okay, food is coming in, I need to burn that, okay? And that's how we start to increase or speed up our metabolism. So yes, when we skip meals, and I used to talk to my teenagers and I would counsel a lot about this, because a lot of teenagers skip breakfast and then they skip lunch. And if you do that over and over again, you're actually telling your brain, I need to hold on to these calories. So you actually burn fat much slower.
Interesting. So there is a science to it.
Yes, wow. Definitely. So I definitely recommend eating at least every 3 hours. I don't know if everybody has time to eat every 2 hours, but 3 or 4 hours is probably.
The bodybuilders can be a little extreme. But so ideally, would you say there's a certain amount of meals that everybody should hit?
I think it's really individualized. I think having 3 meals and 1 or 2 snacks a day is probably sufficient for most people. And really the timing is going to be really important, especially related to fitness and bodybuilding. And I talk about in my class about how you want to make sure you have those quick acting carbohydrates right before you work out in order to increase performance.
Gotcha. All right. It was perfect. the way we went into that. Good versus bad carbs, right? Is that even a thing, right? Like people say like, oh, like, you know, carbs are bad, or like certain, especially, you know, certain types of carbs. You know, we were talking about like the white carbs. What's your take? Is that a...
So first thing, like we talked about in class, right, you need carbohydrates.
Yeah.
Right? Your brain needs carbohydrates. Okay, so carbohydrates break down into glucose or sugar, and our brains need that. So I really don't recommend any very low carb or especially a no carb diet because we really, really do need carbohydrates.
But can't ketosis be like a good thing to be in for, I guess, a period of time, especially if you're trying to lose weight?
So any restrictive diet can cause weight loss. So if our only goal in health outcomes is weight loss, then yeah, we can do that. But if we are thinking about overall health, then we're concerned about a long-term effects of the ketogenic diet, right? Because we're thinking about high fat and the impact of that on cardiovascular disease. And also, it's very difficult to maintain a low carbohydrate diet. And so even though we will lose weight when you stop carbohydrates, you will very quickly regain the weight when you start to eat carbohydrates again.
It's probably, your body probably has a very, I guess, aggressive response, right? I mean, going from not eating any carbs to, you know, eating, I guess, a lot of carbs, right?
Especially because your body wants carbs.
Yeah.
Carbs is the preferred energy for our body, and especially for the brain, which is also why we eat too much carbs. So we do eat too much carbs because we really like carbs, they taste good, they're satisfying. So that's really what we need to think about is the portion sizes and a variety of different sources. So when you say, are there good carbs versus bad carbs, there are definitely carbs that are better.
Yeah.
Like our fruits and vegetables and our whole grains.
Yeah.
So if we focus on those and we try to limit the things like chips and cookies and cakes, then we'll kind of have a better relationship with carbs. But still, of course, you know, we want to still have those treats sometimes too.
But, so let's just say you're working out, right? Does it really matter what carb you eat before training? Or is it kind of like your body just doesn't care? Like whatever carbs it has, it's just gonna use?
So that is a very interesting part because when I talk about sports performance, I actually talk about having the most refined carbohydrates you can have. So whereas in the rest of our diet, we want to really focus on complex carbs, whole grains, and fruits and vegetables. But for exercise, we really want fast-acting carbs. So we want things like even Rice Krispies, like the Rice Krispie trend.
Yes.
Right?
It's a big thing, like having a Rice Krispie treat before working out.
Yeah. So that it really does increase physical performance because it makes sure that our glycogen stores are full, and we use our glycogen stores when we exercise. So our glycogen is the way that our bodies store glucose, and within 2 hours of exercise, that's depleted. So if we really want to do well in our weightlifting session or in our endurance run, if we have carbohydrates right before, that will increase the endurance and the duration that we can perform at a high level.
I know a lot of runners, like before a competition, they'll carb up and eat like a ton of food.
And it's really about like that. You want to have high sugar content and not such a large quantity of food because you don't want to have stomach issues, right?
Yeah, of course.
But having even like a handful of raisins or gummies or something like that really does help us be able to increase our duration when we're doing any kind of physical activity.
Now, would you say there's a difference between a juice, right? So let's just say you go, and let's just say you do get a juice that's like 100%, like let's just say 100% cranberry juice versus soda, right? Both, you know, high in sugar, right? But, you know, one comes from a cranberry and one, you know, is artificially manufactured. Is there a difference between those two from, like, I guess a physiological perspective? Like, does your body recognize them to be two different things?
So yes and no.
Okay.
So in terms of sugar and how it impacts our weight, no, it's really not going to have much of a difference. 10 grams of sugar is 10 grams of sugar, right?
Yeah. So
that's why we do want to kind of limit juice sometimes as well. But there are good things in the juice that are not necessarily in the soda, right? So there are going to be vitamins and minerals, especially depending on what kind of fruit juice it is. There may be a little bit of fiber, although homemade juice with lots of pulp and fiber is going to be better nutritionally. Because
so ideally you want the pulp.
Yeah.
You did. Interesting. I never even thought about that.
Yeah. So even though as kids we always wanted like the no pulp orange
Yeah.
juice and things like that, the pulp is actually helpful because that's where the fiber is.
Interesting. So for the viewers out there, get your orange juice with pulp.
Yes, and even fresh squeeze if you can.
Yeah.
Squeeze it yourself and then you have a fresh orange juice. Yeah, so that's the difference between the soda and the juice. Sugar and calories, they may be very similar, but we are getting added benefits from the juice that we're not getting from the soda.
Gotcha. Okay. So the bodybuilding diet, right? You know, when I think of the bodybuilding diet, I think of chicken, rice, maybe a little veggie. So I mean, some bodybuilders don't even do vegetables, right? You know, the eggs, the protein shakes. Is that stuff good for long-term health?
So I think that a lot of bodybuilders really do focus a lot on healthy eating, and I think having a slightly higher protein intake is good and sufficient, especially if they are focusing on things like chicken and turkey and seafood and things like that, and not too much of the red meats. I think it is a pretty healthy diet, but we want to make sure that they're not restricting whole food groups. So when we think about the vegetables and things like that, we want to make sure that we're having a balanced diet. You know, but having a lot, the yogurt, the cottage cheese, things like that's healthy and fine and going to help them reach their goals. But we want to make sure they are having enough fiber and fruits and vegetables too.
Now you mentioned red meat. Can red meat be bad for your health?
So when we think about the carnivore diet that's like
Yes.
super popular right now, it does concern me because most of our research related to red meat is that we're worried about the saturated fat content in red meat. And high saturated fat diets can increase our risk for heart disease, right? It increases our bad cholesterol levels and really increases our risk. So for years, the recommendation has been to keep saturated fat intake at 10% of your calories or less. But now we're seeing this everywhere with this carnivore diet of people just recommending large plates of meat.
Yeah.
And I am really worried about heart health, but I'm also really worried about gut health because if we're just eating a lot of meat and not a lot of fiber or fruits and vegetables, that's going to cause issues with our intestinal health as well.
Gotcha. Because I don't know, my philosophy is like, you know what? You get the grass-fed beef, and you can eat a ton of it because it's like healthy and it's all natural. But even with like a grass-fed beef, you still have to be careful of the saturated fat content.
Yeah, it's still going to have high saturated fat. Grass-fed beef is great if you have access to that, and I do also try to buy grass-fed beef, and I do eat ground meat at home and we use it to make meatballs, but I also try to vary that when also using ground turkey and ground chicken as well.
And also, if you're going to use a ground beef, right, it's probably better to use a leaner cut.
Definitely. So I usually recommend 90% lean. I feel like anything more than that, it makes it like really dry.
It does, yeah. It's funny because 90 for me is like the magic number. You know, it's like you go the other way and it's not going to taste very good.
Exactly. So taste is also really important because if it doesn't taste good, we're going to end up binging later on foods that, you know, that do taste good. It might not be as healthy for us.
Yeah. How can someone, let's just say someone's a little chunky, right? They want to reduce their body fat. Are there any key steps they can take nutritionally?
Yeah, I think that the most important things for weight loss are, first of all, meal consistency, not skipping meals, and really focusing on prioritizing protein, high-level protein, hopefully from lean meats, and fiber and healthy fats. And really, if we try to have 30 grams of fiber a day, having 20% of our calories from protein, and having some good healthy fats, that can really help to promote a healthy weight.
Gotcha. Now, for healthy fats, what would you recommend? We were talking about avocado, right? Even, you know, from like salmon, right? I know that has a lot of healthy fat.
Yeah.
How's would it be like grass-fed butter or olive oil.
Yeah, definitely olive oil. Butter is fine, but we want to limit it a little bit because of the high saturated fat.
So regardless of whether it's grass-fed or just regular, you still want to
Yeah,
limit it.
so the grass-fed will make it so that these products will have, we know that they are more natural, there may not be any antibiotics used in the cows
Yeah.
and things like that. We know that they are eating grass instead of other feed, but it isn't going to really change the fat content of the food products.
So when something's grass-fed or it's, organic, right? Does that really matter in the big scheme of things?
I think it really depends, right?
Okay.
And I think that a lot of times when the messaging is only that you should have organic or grass-fed products, then that kind of limits so many people's access to food, right? And it starts to demonize food, and we don't want to do that. So I always say, like, the highest quality that you can access is the best that you should do, right? And there are certain products that are better to get organic. There's a list that's produced every year called the Dirty Dozen. I think I talk about it in my class. Those are the foods that are the most impacted by pesticides. And so those are the ones that if you were going to choose some organic, you would want to choose those from that list. So things like strawberries are usually on that list, so it's always better to get organic of that. But then there's also a list of like the cleanest foods too, and those are ones that we don't really have to worry about getting organics too much of, especially things that we don't really like eat the edible peel on, so bananas and things like that.
But like a hard exterior, right, where it's pretty much protected.
Exactly.
Yeah. Makes sense. It makes sense.
Exactly. And even then, like whatever you can access, if you can access locally grown vegetables, they may cost less, than organic, but still be a really good, starting point for health. So whatever you can access that you can afford is, I think, the best.
But ideally, though, if you can afford organic.
For the ones on the Dirty Dozen list, I would say. But for the other ones, I don't think it matters.
Okay. So we are onto the supplements part, right?
Okay.
So any supplements that come to your mind that you would recommend for the majority of the population?
So, yeah, I'm not too much of a supplement expert, but there are the vitamin supplements that I do recommend. I do recommend vitamin D for almost everybody because we found that almost everybody who lives in the Northeast is deficient in vitamin D. And I always tell people, if you don't know your vitamin D levels, you should get tested because most of us don't get enough vitamin D because we are supposed to get vitamin D from the sun, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of us don't, most of us don't get enough direct access. So I really strongly recommend vitamin D supplementation. And I also really recommend folic acid supplementation during pregnancy. And folic acid is extremely important to prevent neural tube defects during pregnancy. But folic acid, if you remember my class, is actually pretty controversial right now. So there are people who are saying that you shouldn't have any of the supplement folic acid because it could, they think that certain people with a genetic difference can't actually absorb folic acid efficiently, and it actually can cause depression and other issues. But it's really kind of fear-mongering because the research doesn't actually point to that. What it does point to is that folic acid is so important in preventing neural tube defects during pregnancy. So I still recommend folic acid.
So you are pro folic acid?
Yes, until the research shows me otherwise, because that's what we need to go by, the scientific research. But for now, I do still strongly recommend folic acid during pregnancy.
Gotcha. Any other supplements, or those your big two?
Those are my big two. I know there's a lot of people who focus on creatine and other things for bodybuilding, but that's a little bit out of my my expertise.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And then any supplements that you're just completely against, or just think are very overrated?
So I just think that whenever we're thinking about taking any herbal supplements, we have to be really careful about them, and we really need to research them. There are a lot of people who take all different types of herbal supplements for all different types of reasons, and a lot of them, we forget that herbs are medication. And just because they are herbal supplements doesn't mean that they're any less potent than medication. And so we really need to be very well versed of the risk related to those. So that's kind of one of my main points about herbal supplements is to make sure you do your research before taking it.
Yeah. I was gonna say, feel like with the herbal supplements, like you're just like, yeah, my friend told me to take it. Like one that comes to my mind is ashwagandha. It's like, yeah, like take some ashwagandha, like it'll help you and this and that. But it's like you don't really know what that's doing, you know. And especially maybe it works for this person, maybe for you it's not the same effect.
Exactly, and you're right. Like we get so much of this advice from our friends and people we work with and go to school with, but we don't know the scientific research behind it.
Yeah.
So I get a little wary about herbs.
Gotcha. Okay. So, are vegetables stupid?
So with this carnivore diet stuff, it's really bringing up a question on vegetables, which I never thought would ever happen in my lifetime.
Yeah.
Because you know we know that vegetables are so important for health. I think vegetables are the opposite of stupid.
So you think they're very important?
Yes, definitely.
In what sense? I mean, obviously they provide fiber, right? And they have some vitamins and minerals, but what would you say is like the main reason why people should be eating vegetables?
So first of all, they are pretty low calorie and high volume. Okay, by eating a lot of calories, it can actually help us, a lot of vegetables, it can actually help us to maintain a healthy weight. So when people are, afraid of vegetables, I'm wondering, what are they really afraid of? Vegetables are low calorie, they're high in a lot of our vitamins and minerals, and of course they have fiber. They also have carbohydrates, so they do provide some of our macronutrients. And they can taste good and be a really important part of our diet. I don't believe in taking out any food group, but especially one that is so helpful for us. And it's really interesting to think about the reasons why people who are proponents of the carnivore diet are scared of vegetables. And the main, one of the reasons is they say they're high in sugar, but actually most vegetables are very low in sugar. The only vegetables that are kind of higher in sugar are more starchy vegetables like our potatoes and carrots and things like that, which are also very nutrient dense and have a lot of important nutrients in them. So that's one thing. And then this whole thing about the anti-nutrients in the vegetables is really interesting to me. So it is true that some vitamins and minerals do work against each other. So if you remember in class, we talk about iron, right? And we talk about how vitamin C increases the absorption of iron and calcium decreases the absorption of iron. So I always tell people try to eat your dairy outside of your iron products to increase the absorption of the iron. So when people are talking about the anti-nutrients in vegetables, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about how sometimes they fight against absorption. But that doesn't mean they're bad for us. It just means that we have to be educated on it and really be thoughtful about it, but also the impact is also pretty minimal. It's not like these nutrients are fighting against each other, but there is some absorption issues that do happen, and if we're mindful of that, we can work around that.
Gotcha. Any final thoughts?
I think there's so much nutrition information out there right now. Especially with my social media feed, with my algorithm, everything I look at is people talking about nutrition and food constantly, and I think it's just so important to weed out that information and really focus on information that's provided by nutrition professionals based on research and what the research tells us. It's very easy to get hyped up into all these diets, right?
And there's so many out there. And one person says, oh, you got to do this, and another person says, oh, you got to do this, and it's just, who do you listen to?
Right, especially with the carnivore diet, you are going to see weight loss, and you are going to see skin improvements when you start taking out sugar and refined carbohydrate, processed foods, right? So you are going to see these quick changes that make people really excited and want to keep doing this, but we don't know what the long-term health effects of this are going to be, right? If we take out all these food groups and only eat meat, yeah, we might see weight loss, but then what's going to happen to our cholesterol? What's going to happen to our gut health later on?
Yeah.
So moderation and balance is
That's
the most
it.
important thing.
So those are the key words, and yeah, thank you for coming on. I
Thank
appreciate
you for
it.
having me.